Hello, this is Tabernacle Talks, the urban talk show coming to you live from the studios of the Tabernacle Baptist Church in Dayton, Ohio. Today's program is entitled, What Should You Do If You Are Stopped, Arrested, or Interviewed by the Police? Please take a few moments to share with family and friends, as this promises to be a presentation for the entire family. Today's presenter is attorney Patricia A. Wilkinson of the Vinoy Law Practice in Dayton, Ohio. Attorney Wilkinson is a University of Dayton Law School graduate who practices criminal law, among other practice areas. Attorney Wilkinson is from Middletown, Ohio, where she serves as the First Lady of Zion Baptist Church, and as an associate minister along with her spouse, Pastor Leon Wilkinson. We believe this program is essential for anyone who's in a public space with the potential to interact with the police. If your children are home from college, please ask them to tune in. This presentation just may save a life.
Hi, I'd like to say hello.
This is the July 26th.
Again, I'm attorney Patricia Wilkinson, and it's so good to be in your presence today. So good to be able to share with you. This topic is such a relevant topic. As we know, there are a lot of incidents that have been happening in our community, and so we're just here to share. I do want to again say that I am an associate attorney at the Vinoy firm. First of all, want to thank Pastor Adelicon for allowing me here, Brother Curtis Welch, who's working with us, and then Dr. Michelle Pierce-Mobley. I appreciate it, so I'm glad to be here. And just to talk a little bit about our firm, there are 5 attorneys there, and we consider ourselves a full-service firm. One of our objectives is that our clients come to us and we're able to provide any kind of services that you desire, any legal services. We handle criminal defense, felonies and misdemeanors, any OVIs or expungements. We handle personal injury claims, car accidents, and slip and falls, wrongful death, workers' compensation. If you've been hurt on your job, we will be able to help you. We handle probate, and that's your last will and testament, and I'm praying that you all have that in place. It doesn't mean you're going anywhere. It just means that you're taking care of your business. We set up trust and do power of attorneys, either healthcare or financial. We do guardianship and adoptions, one of the areas that I really love. Family law, custody cases, divorces, and then finally landlord-tenant cases, we do that as well. And with the COVID happening now, there are a lot of landlords who are trying to put tenants out. So contact us if that is your situation. It is our desire to equip our community with knowledge and information that we otherwise, as a community, aren't privy to, and thus it allows the community to make informed legal decisions. So contact us if you need assistance. So information is important, and slide 2 speaks of information. The Tabernacle family has asked me to discuss the question, what should you do if you're stopped, if you're arrested, if you're interviewed? We call it interrogated by the police. This is certainly a hot and relevant topic for such a time as this. This has always been an issue. It always has been, but I believe it's been illuminated by social media, which allows us to capture instances in real time that involve the police stopping us and arresting us and abusing our communities. I know there are a lot of people who don't like social media. They don't think very highly of it, but I must say that it certainly is a catalyst for our exposing ill behavior against our communities. The late evangelist Miles Monroe once stated, "When purpose is not known, abuse is inevitable." And I believe one of the ills is that we didn't understand the purpose of social media. So we put all kinds of things on there. But now we're realizing that we can actually expose those things that were behind closed doors. And so I actually thank God for social media. As a caveat, I just want to share that on social media, just on Sunday evening, I was on Facebook just kind of relaxing and perusing, and I saw 3 young men. They were teenagers, and they were walking across the street, and they were jaywalking. The police stopped them, and I first want to say that the stop and the circumstances surrounding that stop were kind of wrong on all kinds of levels. However, they were okay. They let them go. Nothing happened to them. But there was one thing that really intrigued me about that encounter. They were there. They were nervous. The police had handcuffed them for jaywalking, right? And there was a bystander who was taking a video. And the first thing she said was, "Do you want me to call your mom?" And the young man said yes. You could tell they were visibly nervous. She said, what is her phone number? He could tell the area code, but didn't know his mom's phone number. So I want to, as a caveat, say to you, as young as they can be, 5, 6, 7 years old, what is my phone number? So that you don't have to go on your cell phone and figure out what that is. At that moment, he needed to call his mom and didn't know how to get in touch with her because the number was in the cell phone. So it's important to be prepared and understand the things that we need. Also, let me share that we are a village. We are expected to care for one another, especially nowadays. I also saw on Facebook where U.S. Representative Maxine Waters jumped out of her car and helped a black man who was being arrested. She went over there to make sure he was being treated correctly. When the young men that I saw that were arrested or stopped by the police, you could see different people in the community just stopping and listening and making sure that they were going to be okay. We're going to have to start doing that again. We've stopped doing that because we're afraid of what might happen. You can be very inconspicuous about it. It doesn't matter. It's okay for you to pull out your cell phone and record what's going on. That'll help us. So let's talk about a stop. A person is stopped or detained. That's great. When an officer uses enough force or a show of authority to make a reasonable person feel that he or she is not free to leave. That's a stop. That's a detainment. If a reasonable person would feel like they couldn't leave, they're being stopped or detained. In addition to calling out you to stop and using their authority, if the officer, of course, pulls out a weapon or they use a threatening voice that makes you feel like you can't go anywhere, that's a stop and that's a detainment. If the officer interferes with your liberty to move about, he or she should first have what we call a reasonable suspicion that you have been involved in a crime. If the police see you commit a crime, they don't need reasonable suspicion. And I talk about that because the levels of what they can do is determined by whether or not they saw you commit the crime, whether or not they have a reasonable suspicion that you committed the crime, or whether or not they have probable cause. So for a stop, we're just talking about reasonable suspicion, a little bit more than a hunch. Reasonable suspicion is the legal standard by police by which a police officer has the right to briefly, and I'm saying that, briefly detain you just to investigate their thinking. The reasonable suspicion standard requires facts or circumstances that would lead a reasonable person to believe that a suspect has, is, or will commit a crime. So a combination of particular facts. One individual may not be, or one situation may not consider to be reasonable suspicion. But for example, so if a police saw someone and they fit a certain description, that gives them a reasonable suspicion. If someone, a suspect, drops a suspicious object after seeing the police, or a suspect in a high crime area runs once they've seen the police. It's okay to run, there's nothing wrong with that, but those in combination, you see a police officer, you run. You see a police officer and you drop an object. That gives them reasonable suspicion to detain you for a brief amount of time. So at that point, the police are allowed to frisk you outside of the suspect's clothing, and we'll talk about that a little later, but only a frisk, so only a pat down just to make sure you have no weapons. So this is when you're walking. This is when you're walking around or carrying around, but let's talk about when you're in your vehicle. There are 3 things that you need to have when you're in your vehicle. And they're documents that you should have, right? Your driver's license, your insurance card, and your registration. And the next slide will actually show you something quite interesting that a lot of people are starting to use. And that is, there is a pouch that you can use that would allow you to put those things within one spot. I want to say that we need to be prepared. As a community, we have to discuss. We're even talking about the talk, right? Have the talk with our young men and our young women. Whether walking or driving, we have to be prepared to be stopped by the police. Be prepared for an encounter with the police. And make sure that insurance card isn't expired. A lot of us will, use our insurance cards, and maybe we've got an old one on file. That actually can go on your ticket. You'll have to go to court to pay or to show that you do have insurance. So I encourage you to have that with you. And finally, don't rummage through your car. Make sure you are in a situation where you're readily actually talking to the police officer. So if we can show that slide there, the one you just showed with the police officer. So here are some bullet points that you can use. If the police ask you why you think you were stopped, the best answer is, "Officer, I have no idea why you stopped me. I don't know. What is it that I did?" You never want to admit to anything, and I'm not saying don't tell the truth, but I'm just saying don't voluntarily solicit any information. If you are not under arrest and you voluntarily make statements, then those statements can be used against you in a court of law. So if it's voluntary, they haven't coerced you into it, you're not in any kind of custody, then just say to the police officer, "I'm not sure. Can you tell me why you stopped me?" So again, never admit to anything. And remember, any traffic infraction allows a citation. An infraction is the least serious offense. As such, infractions do not lead to jail time, probation, or create a criminal record. The punishment, though, for infractions is usually a fine, or in the case of a traffic violation, points on your driving record. You may also receive community service depending on the violation. And a lot of times people may think that, well, I was only 1 mile or 2 miles over the speed limit. 1 mile, just 1 mile over the speed limit is an infraction. So whatever it is that the officer is saying to you, we always say in our office, resolve it in the courtroom. Don't resolve it on the street. Don't resolve it in front of encountering the police officer, but resolve it in the courtroom. So here we go with the next slide. Remain calm. And sometimes that's difficult to do, but we have to remember there are good officers out there that are actually there to help us. And from their standpoint, they have to go back home to their family too. That's what they want to do. They want to be safe as well. That's what they want to do. They want to be safe just like we want to. So the best thing to do is remain calm. Do all that you can to remain safe. And the objective is to go home safely. So what you want to do is roll down your window. You want to place your hands on the steering wheel. You want to make sure they see your hands. If you have a CCW, be sure you let that officer know. Don't you reach for it, but very calmly in your speaking, "Officer, I do have a CCW." Let them know. Let them know where it is. Stay just where you are. Don't make any quick or sudden movements. And engage with the officer in a cordial manner. Stay in the car until and unless the officer directs you to get out of the car. And let me share with you Rayshard Brooks. That was the very last situation that that really was publicized, and that went wrong. And you look at that situation and say, he was really calm. He was like, "Yeah, I'm going to my daughter's birthday party, and he did fall asleep. And can I just go to my family? They live near. Can I just go?" And it was really cordial. And so many of us ask the question, even if I'm speaking in a cordial manner, why does it turn out that way? We have to continue to do the best that we can to remain calm. And again, if the situation turns out wrong, we don't take care of it on the street. We take care of it in the courtroom. So we remain quiet, remain calm, talk to the officer, and just let them know, "I'm just as nervous as you are." And then I'll go back to our village and say, those of us that are surrounding, and that's what's happening, that are surrounding the situations, make sure, if you can, stay far enough away, but close enough that you can at least record what's going on so that there are witnesses that can actually substantiate what's happening. So the next slide. So when you're arrested by the police, now typically the police need a warrant for a search or a seizure. And a search is just that, searching and looking for. A seizure is when they're actually taking away and confiscating whatever it is. So what can the officer search? So we talked about a reasonable suspicion. We talked about probable cause. An officer may make a limited search, and we talked about that, right, of the suspect, just a pat down. And let me say that when the young boys, and I said at the beginning of the PowerPoint presentation, I talked about the 3 little young teenagers who were jaywalking across the street. The officers actually handcuffed these young boys. And then they went into the backpack and started looking through his backpack. That was just so wrong on so many levels. But then I'll go back to, there are 3 young men, and there are 2 officers, and sometimes just to make sure everything is protected, right? To protect the officer, to protect the men, then they just detain them. The cuffing, the handcuffing was a little suspect. So what he was doing in that situation, he was able really only to pat them down to make sure that they didn't have any weapons on them. Even in the backpack, he should have just patted down. You can't manipulate it. They can't do that. They can't not if it's just what we call a Terry stop, just has just a Terry stop. Now, one thing that did happen is that this officer actually witnessed them jaywalking. So they did witness them. This is a crime. It's a crime to jaywalk. But it's a small infraction, right? And they could have done it, they could have handled it differently. And that's what we're trying to do in the community, to make sure we educate the officers that they're little young boys just like maybe they have, just handle it differently. But an officer can make a limited search of a suspect, a pat down, just to make sure that there are no weapons on them. There are some exceptions to a search or a seizure if you don't have a warrant. Now, if you are doing a search or a seizure, officer does have to have a warrant, but there are exceptions to it. So an officer may conduct a search or a seizure without a warrant if you give them consent. And so what am I going to say? Don't give them consent. If they want to search you, tell them they're going to have to get a warrant. We're going to say it nicely, we're going to say it cordially. You can also say to an officer when you're stopped, ask them, am I detained? Can I go? Just to make sure what the situation is. So with the search or the seizure, you don't have to give them consent. And you can say, no, I don't consent to you searching my car. I don't consent to you searching my person. Now, they can do a pat down again, but not a complete search. I don't consent to you searching my home. If illegal items, another exception, are in plain view, they can actually seize that. They don't need to search for it because they can see it in plain view. And that's what we call it, a plain view exception. We can see it. And the illegality of that item has to be prominent as well. If the search is incident to a valid arrest, if they're validly arresting you, they can search. That's another exception. We call another exception an exigent circumstance that requires action before evidence is destroyed. So if they know that these people, a suspect has drugs on them and they know they're going to go flush it down the toilet or they're going to do something else, they're actually able to seize that item before actually getting a search warrant. If there is a search or a seizure prior to a warrant, and there are no exceptions, it's actually called fruit of the poisonous tree. So the poisonous tree is the fact that the officers did something that was not constitutional. And the results of that, the fruit of that, is maybe obtaining some of that evidence. So in that situation, then that actually could possibly not come into evidence because of the way they obtain that evidence. We're going to go to slide 7. If you're interviewed by the police, and I know so many of us know the Miranda Rights, we probably can just like rehearse it. But it's really good if you actually go over that, really go over it. You have the right to remain silent. And because you have that right, take it. Remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you in the court of law. So now the Miranda Rights, it takes effect once you are in custody. We call it custodial interrogation. If you cannot leave, if they've said no, you can't leave, if they're interrogating you, they have to then start, they're asking you questions, they then have to start giving you your Miranda rights. Anything you say can and will be used against you in the court of law. You have the right to talk to an attorney. If you can't afford an attorney, we need to really, sometimes we say it and we don't say it, really understand. Then one will be provided for you. You have that right. And then they'll ask you, do you understand the rights that's just been read to you? And with this in mind, do you wish to speak? If you begin speaking, you've waived all those rights. If you start talking about, I didn't do it, and it was really my brother, and I didn't see him, and I didn't even know that car was stolen, although I was riding in that car, y'all help me. If you start talking, you've waived your rights. So you have to, in this situation, you have to affirmatively, you have to state that I don't want to say anything. I'm not speaking. And you have to affirmatively state, I want an attorney. If you just keep silent, the officer can actually just go out, give you a few minutes, come back in, and ask you questions. He can stay there and continue to ask you questions. The moment you say, I'm not going to say anything, I don't waive my rights, and I want an attorney, that officer is not allowed to ask you any more questions. So just remember that. And I share that because a lot of people think if they just stay silent, then that does it, and it does not. So I want to share and make sure. So custody can be any situation. We're talking about in custody in which an individual does not have freedom of action. They do not need to be formally arrested, placed in handcuffs, or otherwise physically restrained. An interrogation can go beyond direct questioning because they can ask you preliminary questions. What's your name? Where do you live? In some states, you're required to answer those questions. Questions to comments made by the police officer. If the officer should know that the suspect is going to make an incriminating statement, if the officer is talking to you knowing that you're going to say something that's going to incriminate you, then definitely you don't want to say anything. Oftentimes we don't do better because we don't know better. And it's so important for us to have forums like this because it's important that we know what we're doing. Can we go back to slide 7? Because I want to share just one last thing with you with regard to the officer, is that a Miranda warning is when you're in custody, right? Custodial interrogation. Once you have been charged, then you're not even allowed to waive that right. It attaches to you. That means once you're charged, the state constitution, it says you have to have an attorney. So just remember, prior to being arrested, you have the right to say yes or no. Once you have been arrested, then it attaches to you, and it says you have a right to an attorney. And if one cannot, if you don't have one, then the state actually has to provide an attorney for you. And we're going to just go to the very last slide. And I just want to share with you, and we talked about that police officers are people too. They really are. And there are some that are really good. There are some that are bad. So a takeaway from this is that the law gives police certain powers to enforce their duty to protect the community they serve, its citizens and their property. So some things that we think the police officers are going beyond what they should be doing, they've actually been giving a little levity to make sure that they're serving and protecting the community. And remember, that used to be on their cruisers all the time, to protect and to serve, and we've gotten away from that. But that is giving them a little levity to do a little bit more than one of us could do so that they can protect the community. Police officers often cross the line of both what is decent and what is legal. But never let that influence you to break the law. So I'm going to go back to the saying we say around the office: take care of it in the courtroom. Don't take care of it on the street. No matter how upset you get, it really can take you somewhere that you don't want to go. Police officers often do what they shouldn't do. But what I can share with you is that if you find that you have been treated incorrectly, if you find that something has been wronged or the police officer has done something that they shouldn't have done, you can take down their license number, take down their badge number, take down their name, ask for a card from them, find out what jurisdiction they're in, and then contact that jurisdiction and let them know. If that doesn't work, feel free to contact an attorney and see if you have a case. See if you have something, there's something that they've done that they should not have done. So you have power as well, and that's what we're trying to let our community know, that we don't have to anymore just sit around and allow them to do things that they should not do. We have power as well, but we've got to do it with dignity, and we have to do it the right way. We take it to the courtroom and not to the street. So take down their information. And even if you believe the officer has no grounds to arrest you, don't argue with them. Don't refuse to arrest. And let me say this as well. If you're stopped and there's a DUI, there are some consequences to not taking a breathalyzer. So I could get into that later on, but there's some consequences to that. If you want to call an office and something like that has happened to you, then a lot of times they can actually revoke your license if you refuse to take the breathalyzer. But if you feel that that's something that you should not do, then handle it by doing what you feel like you need to do and calling an attorney's office. So even if you believe the officer has no grounds to arrest you, do not argue with them, but get that information so that you can contact somebody and let them know and report them. The atmosphere right now is actually good for that. The atmosphere is awesome, and there are all kinds of police stations and jurisdictions that are trying to help these police officers do a better job in our community. And then lastly, and it's most important, if you need assistance, you find a good attorney. A lot of people try to do these things on their own. And once we get it, we're trying to fix what you've broken. So find a good attorney that can help you and that can assist you with any issues that you may have. It was wonderful talking to you. I hope I helped this community. That's what I'm here for. Again, Patricia Wilkinson. Feel free to call me at my firm, and I hope you stay safe and be well. Thank you.